Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes Representative Min for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for your testimony. So first question for you all. How many of you have taken an economics introductory class? Can you raise your hand if you have? Okay, let the record reflect all 4 raised their hands. Can you raise your hand if you're familiar and remember the concept of negative externalities or negative external costs? Only Ms. Howell's raising her hand. Mr. Tarpley looked like he was about to. Okay, just as a refresher, you may remember from Econ 101, negative externalities describe the indirect or hidden negative costs sometimes created by an economic transaction. The classic example, of course, is downstream pollution, where a factory discharges its waste into a river, which in turn creates unclean water that leads to cancer, health issues, maybe disrupts the fishing industry downstream. The negative costs of this pollution are not paid for by the factory or its consumers, but are instead costs that society bears. We might call them hidden costs. Now, offshore drilling is another textbook example of an economic activity that produces large negative externalities or hidden costs. This is not a disputed point. As we all know, burning fossil fuels releases large amounts of carbon into the atmosphere, which has created a climate crisis that we are just beginning to wrap our heads around. According to the IMF, when you factor in these hidden costs related to carbon emissions, oil production costs our society over $7 trillion a year. We're seeing these costs accrue in the form of extreme temperatures across the world, including the 140-degree temperatures we saw in India last year, biblical-level disasters like wildfires, tornadoes, hurricanes, extreme drought and flooding, and the like. And here is the thing. In 100 years, when people look back at this time, they're going to say that the 2020s were uniquely benign, uniquely cool as far as our weather patterns. Our grandkids and great-grandkids are going to look back and say that these were the good old days. We are literally damning them to hell on Earth unless we aggressively reduce our carbon emissions. The negative external costs of oil production are so large as to potentially be an existential threat to our civilization. Offshore drilling also produces other major hidden costs, which I want to briefly address. First, the threat of oil spills, which have been a recurring problem for California's coastlines over the years. In 2021, my district experienced a major oil spill off the coast of Huntington, which shut down our local coastal economy and brought outdoor recreation and tourism to a halt. And we dodged a bullet as this was a small spill of only 25,000 gallons. But here is the problem. It's increasingly becoming clear that, at least in California, the economics of offshore drilling mean it's a matter of when, not if, we will have additional oil spills. The oil rigs off our coasts were built between the 1960s and 80s and are long past their shelf life. Production is in decline, and the original leaseholders have all long since sold off their leases to small wildcat companies, which have no incentive to invest meaningfully in safety and soundness. To put it simply, offshore drilling has become a ticking time bomb for our coastline. So, Mr. Tarpley, would you be surprised if I told you that California's coastal economy, our beautiful beaches and tourism and innovation that we generate, is quite valuable? Yes or no?
Yes.
You would be surprised? Okay.
I understand how valuable it is.
It produces $1.7 trillion a year in value, according to NOAA. Mr. Tarpley, I guess I'll just ask you again, would you be surprised if I told you that oil drilling off the coast of California is very minuscule by comparison?
That's correct.
That's right. Offshore oil drilling near California generates less than 0.006% of the value generated by our coastal economy. So I will just ask Ms. Howell, I'll switch to you. Do you think that the potential risks to California's coastal economy are justified by the tiny amount of oil being produced there?
No, absolutely. There's no reason. Sorry.
Now, another major hidden cost associated with offshore drilling is decommissioning costs, which I really haven't heard addressed too much here. But once these wells run dry, you have to plug them so they don't leak, dismantle the infrastructure so they don't create long-term problems. This costs a lot of money. Today, over 78% of the 2,000-plus leases in U.S. waters or outside of U.S. waters are currently idle, which means the associated oil rigs are abandoned and need decommissioning. But instead of actually paying for these costs, all too often, oil companies abandon these obligations and declare bankruptcy. In the last 15 years, there have been more than 30 Chapter 11 bankruptcies of offshore operators, leaving U.S. taxpayers with $7.5 billion in liabilities. It's estimated that we have another $40 to $70 billion in further cleanup costs remaining, and these are paid for by the taxpayers. Is that not correct, Ms. Howell?
That's absolutely correct.
So I want to just close with this. You may remember that last May, Donald Trump, now the president, held a meeting with oil executives where he promised to slash environmental protections if the oil industry contributed $1 billion to his campaign. Perhaps coincidentally, in the months following, oil executives donated hundreds of million dollars to his campaign, as well as the campaign of many other Republicans campaigning on slashing our environmental regulations. This is the first hearing this committee is holding since that time. And I guess my question is, when you think about the merits, whatever you think about the merits of offshore drilling, do you think, and I'll ask this to Ms. Howell, that Americans might reasonably see this hearing as a form of corruption, where House Republicans are delivering on the pay-to-play promise that Donald Trump made last year to the oil industry?
Absolutely. The premise that we are.
I would request a point of order. I would request that the gentleman's words be taken down. I think
on what
he is
basis?
I think that he is maligned every single person on this side of the aisle
I'm
in terms of
I'm
the
asking the
hearing.
witness if this
You
is a
have
reasonable
indicated
question.
that we are engaging in corruption.
No, I said, is it reasonable for
Mr.
Americans
Chairman,
to believe that,
the
based on
gentleman,
the things that we
may I
all read in the
speak?
newspapers?
The chair will
speak?
take a moment to consider.
Thank you.
The chair, after conferring, we're going to, at the moment, allow them to stand. We are going to review, those are the exact language.
Should she be allowed to answer the question? I asked her if it would be reasonable for people to assume that, the American people to assume that, or believe it.
We're out of time right now. If somebody yields your time, Mr. Min, you can
Thank
do
you.
that.
I yield back.
But we're going to review and make that determination as quickly as possible.
Thank you. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Representative Hageman from Wyoming for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that the question at the beginning of the last set of questions was whether any of you had any economic background. My question for you is, do any of you understand the concept of opportunity costs?
Yes.
Okay, it's an important concept, isn't it?
Yes, it
I wish that the folks on the other side understood the concept of opportunity costs. I also wish that they understood the concept of energy poverty, because it is the policies that they
Point
have
of
been
order.
pushing
She's
forward.
suggesting that we don't understand the concept, and I would just rebut that. I think she's maligning our side here. I actually do understand the concept of opportunity costs.
Overruled.
The Port of Fourchon, Mr. Chiason, did I say that correctly?
Chasson, but that's.
Just, all right. The Port of Fourchon plays a critical role in offshore energy production, supporting a vast network of workers and suppliers across the country, including in Wyoming. Wyoming-based companies manufacture equipment and provide services that support offshore oil and gas operations, but restrictions on leasing impact supply chains beyond just the Gulf Coast. Gulf energy revenues benefit states throughout GOMESA, but Wyoming receives no similar revenue sharing from energy production on federal lands. Should Congress revisit how energy-producing states are compensated for leasing on federal lands and waters?
Thank you for that question. Yes, I do believe we need to re-look at revenue sharing.
Okay, and Mr. Wilson, Wyoming's natural gas industry is closely tied to Gulf Coast export facilities, which rely on a steady offshore oil and gas production. The Biden administration's regulatory delays for offshore leasing mirror policies restricting drilling on federal lands in Wyoming, raising concerns about a broader trend of federal overreach in U.S. energy policy. Wyoming's natural gas pipelines interconnect with Gulf LNG facilities. If offshore production is restricted, what impact would that have on Wyoming's ability to move natural gas to export markets?
Well, the natural gas market's a global market. It's also a national market. So any restrictions in any areas on natural land are going to impact other areas of production.
So it will have an impact on Wyoming if they shut off
I
the
think it'll
coast.
have an impact on all portions of the natural gas industry, yes.
From a legal perspective, do you see a coordinated effort by federal agencies to curtail U.S. energy production across multiple sectors?
I mean, what I can tell you is that over the last 4 years, we've seen more difficulty in acquiring permits. In the small E&P production that we do have, we've seen more difficulty in acquiring federal permits, although I will say that FERC is operating in a very efficient manner right now and has been for the last couple of years, but generally, yes.
Mr. Tarpley, restrictions on offshore leasing impact workforce mobility and job opportunities. Wyoming is rich in critical minerals and rare earth elements, which are essential for offshore drilling technologies. Federal leasing delays could disrupt domestic supply chains for these minerals. Offshore drilling requires specialized metals and components, some of which are sourced from Wyoming's mining industry. Have federal leasing delays impacted demand for domestically sourced critical minerals, pushing such production overseas?
I certainly think that regulatory slowdown and delays has affected demand, and it's also affected the workforce and everything throughout the supply chain, so yes.
So one of the things that has been very critically important that I have watched over the last 4 years relates to the idea, again, of opportunity costs. And when we talk about opportunity costs in the context of offshore drilling, Mr. Wilson, could you explain a little bit about what I might be referencing in that regard?
I hate to try to get in anyone's mind, but what I can tell you is that to the extent we are not producing it in the Gulf, somebody else is producing it. We have one atmosphere. An emission that occurs in Australia or Asia is no different than an emission that occurs in the US. We produce our oil and natural gas in the Gulf in a manner that is cleaner than anybody else in the world. And it seems like the last place we should begin if we're worried about emissions reductions is US oil and natural gas production.
Mr. Cheslin, did we see a decrease in domestic energy use in the last 4 years?
Domestic energy use, no.
Okay. Did we see a decrease in domestic energy production?
It has increased.
Okay.
Yes.
But our demand for energy is increasing essentially every day, isn't it?
Absolutely, and having a certainty in the process. Again, it was mentioned before, if we don't continue to lease lands and explore for oil and natural gas in other areas of the Gulf of Mexico, production will begin to decrease.
And we'll have to get it from somewhere else, won't we?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I yield back.
Representative Hageman, we will be ruling on your point of order.
Chairman, Professor Vladeck, while the Republican majorities in the House and Senate stand aside and do nothing to stop the Trump administration's incursions on congressional authority, the courts have begun to step in and block some of these unlawful actions. But not content merely to undermine congressional authority, in the face of these court decisions, senior administration officials have now tried to question the legitimacy of the courts themselves. For example, in response to a court order blocking Elon Musk from accessing sensitive Treasury Department data, Musk said that the judge who made the ruling, quote, needs to be impeached now. Vice President J.D. Vance stated that, quote, judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. President Trump said, quote, no judge should frankly be allowed to make that kind of decision. It's a disgrace. The White House called the judgment absurd and judicial overreach. And now these vague threats to judicial independence have seemingly crossed the line into actual defiance of a court order. Yesterday, a federal judge in Rhode Island ruled that the White House had defied his order to unfreeze billions of dollars in federal grants. Can you describe the constitutional crisis we would face if the Trump administration continues to ignore valid court orders?
Sure. I think, Congressman, we've never seen a crisis quite of that scope. I mean, the famous quote about Andrew Jackson and John Marshall is apocryphal. Andrew Jackson actually did not frustrate the Supreme Court's decision in Worcester versus Georgia. The only example we have of a president ever openly defying a decision by a justice was Lincoln at the outset of the Civil War, refusing to comply with the writ of habeas corpus issued by Chief Justice Taney by himself, not by the full Supreme Court. We've never seen a president who said, okay, the Supreme Court has told me I have to stop doing something, I'm gonna keep doing it. And I think the critical point at that point is we would have a breakdown, Congressman, not just in the rule of law and the separation of powers, we'd have a breakdown in the courts because the executive branch depends upon the courts when it's the plaintiff to prosecute crimes, to bring civil enforcement action. So I think, the point of no return would be a point when the courts are no longer willing to even do the executive branch's regular business because the executive branch won't abide by the court's judgments.
In your testimony, you briefly described 4 areas that this committee should be focusing on right now to address the unprecedented power grab by President Trump and Elon Musk, or maybe I should put that in reverse order. Can you please elaborate on these suggestions?
Sure. I mean, it seems to me that this committee, both historically and currently, has both the power and the mandate to engage in rigorous oversight of what the Department of Justice specifically is doing, of how the executive branch is complying or not complying with the various statutes, of the firings of inspectors general, of the firing of the special counsel Hampton Dellinger, who is the the head of the whistleblowing agency within the federal government. This committee has the power, of course, to consider whether legislation should be proposed, to rein in some of these claims, to backstop existing statutes, or perhaps even if the majority is so inclined to authorize what the president is doing. But the point, I think, Congressman, is that what we have seen over the first 3 weeks is the president suggesting that this committee and all of Congress is completely unnecessary for him to do what he wants to do. And so whether it's through oversight hearings, whether it's through withholding legislation, whether it's through passing legislation, whether it's through the bully pulpit that members of this committee on both sides are so skilled at using, it seems like there is a much more important story to tell about what is happening right now to the separation of powers in this country than the admittedly important stories of my fellow witnesses. Those are all problems, but what we're seeing is a structural attempt to reallocate power, the likes of which we've never seen before, and that's where I think this committee has a responsibility.
Mr. Smith has argued for an independent judiciary. If we allow the Trump administration to skirt court orders, does the independent judiciary really function?
So I guess I am one congressman who still thinks that the line is holding. We have more examples historically of what I would call slow-walking compliance with court orders by the executive branch, the likes of which seems to be happening right now. I would not put it past the possibility, Congressman, that part of the lack of compliance we're seeing is because of incompetence, not malice. And so it seems to me that we are not at the point yet where the executive branch is affirmatively refusing to comply with federal court orders.
And if we get to that point?
Then I think it would be incumbent upon this committee to pursue articles of impeachment. And I would hope that there would be sufficient members of the majority who would think that that was part of their constitutional responsibility, that the politics of the moment would give way to the politics of our constitutional order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman's time is expired.
Thank you, Professor. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Now recognize the gentlewoman from Wyoming for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I guess I would take your testimony a bit more seriously, Mr. Vladeck, if you actually had ever complained or shown any light on the Biden administration's efforts to forgive the student loans in violation of the law and court order. Ms. Wade, I appreciate your passion for this issue. It is something that is incredibly significant, and I think the caterwauling that you hear on the other side is what happens when you shine a light on the scurry little things that live under most rocks that most of us find rather disgusting. The 2024 version of CEI's 10,000 Commandments found that federal regulations' total compliance costs and economic effects are at least $2.117 trillion annually. U.S. households pay an average of $15,788,000 annually in a hidden tax, which consumes 17% of income and 22% of household expenses. The Biden-Harris administration imposed over $1.7 trillion in cumulative regulatory costs on the economy, surpassing all predecessors. The issue of overregulation in this country is absolutely real, and it is people like you that are affected, regardless of whether Mr. Vladeck feels that you should have a voice in these proceedings. Mr. Smith, I want to turn to you because I think people need to understand what ALJs, administrative law judges, and administrative law courts actually do in this system. If you want to talk about unconstitutionality, Article 3 establishes an independent judiciary to protect citizens from loss of life, liberty, and property without due process of law. Over the last 50 years or so, a variety of federal agencies have created their own court systems, led by administrative law judges. It would come as no surprise to no one that agencies enjoy outsized success in proceedings before these ALJs. After all, they're wearing the same jerseys. They're on the same team. In Article 3 courts, as provided by the Constitution, the SEC only wins about 58% of its cases. And between fiscal year 2011 and 2014, the SEC, however, won an average of 90% of its cases in front of ALJs. The FTC, who you went up against, wins not over 90% of its cases before its own ALJs. Yet Lena Khan, who was the head of the FTC under the last administration, lost almost every single case she ever brought before an Article 3 case, or an Article 3 court. When Axon was forced into the FTC Administrative Law Court, or ALC, proceedings, were you provided with the same protections and rights you would expect in an Article III court, such as due process, the right to a trial by jury, that sort of thing?
Absolutely not. No, it was a foregone conclusion. Frankly, it was described to me by my attorneys as hopeless. There was a 0% chance over the previous 20 years of getting a fair trial. And even once we came out, if it went to appeal, the appellate process would be only reviewing the FTC's version of events. They get to write the entire record, and you never get a day in court. Maybe you get an appellate review to see if they made an error in the law, but we would never have gotten a chance for an independent arbiter to hear our claims.
I would think that the people on the other side and Mr. Vladek would be concerned about the violation of constitutional rights that you just described, but apparently they're more concerned about protecting the unelected bureaucrats and their ability to send millions of dollars to things that we don't want to pay for, such as trans comic books for people in Peru. The FTC enjoys over 90% success rate in proceedings before the ALJs, as we just talked about. And what I understand is that you were forced to spend $20 million defending yourself in these FTC proceedings. Having been an administrative law attorney for many years, I describe this as the process is the punishment. Would you agree?
The process was a heck of a lot of punishment. However, it was nowhere near what was being threatened. I mean, for a $13 million acquisition, the government was basically looking to seize $1 billion worth of intellectual property, as well as half our customers, and an unlimited liability. So the process was terrible, but we had to go through it because the alternative was even worse.
As you likely know, in this Congress, I have introduced the 7th Amendment Restoration Act, which provides Americans with the right to remove their cases before an ALJ to an Article III district court. Do you think that that is something that would have helped you in pushing back and fighting back against the FTC in these horrific proceedings?
I have to say that that proposal is beautiful in its simplicity, and I think it actually would fit what we've all talked about, the system of checks and balances functioning properly, that an American should be able to say, my goodness, if I have the government coming after me, may I please have an independent judge where I can plead my case and have a chance of prevailing.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Thank you, Ms. Wade. Thank you, Dr. McLaughlin, for being willing to come here and expose this horrific situation, this horrific administrative situation that we're dealing with. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. We now recognize the gentleman from Maryland, the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Raskin.
Whew. This committee has worked tirelessly over the past 2 years to expose the censorship industrial complex and how censorship has permeated so many of our once trusted institutions. We have confirmed, for example, that the Biden administration pressured and coerced Facebook, Meta, and other social media companies to remove true and accurate content, including the fact that the Hunter Biden laptop, in all of its horrific glory, did in fact belong to him and was an honest depiction of not only his life, but of his corruption. We exposed the World Federation of Advertisers, or WFA, and its evil spawn, the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, or GARM, as being in reality a $1 trillion antitrust operation designed to prevent conservative media from generating revenue through advertising sales. We informed the public that their government, a government that they pay for, was using third parties to prevent them from obtaining accurate information about COVID-19 and the efficacy of the vaccines. We exposed the long-term effort by our so-called political betters to censor our speech, to prevent us from freely exercising our religion, to prohibit us from assembling peaceably, to destroy freedom of the press, and to block our ability to petition our government for redress, the 5 pillars of the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. To say that what we learned is frightful and frightening is an understatement. It is the absolute antithesis of a free society. If we cannot speak truth to power, we have no power. If the government can block the dissemination of valid, legitimate, and accurate information about our very health care, then we are serfs, not free people. If the entire mainstream media complex is turned into a government mouthpiece, corruption becomes the order of the day, and freedom, equal protection, the rule of law, and accountability mean nothing. There were numerous people who helped expose the scandal, including several on this panel today, and the American people thank you. Your willingness to take on the censorship industrial complex is admirable, and it is not hyperbole to say that you had a hand in saving our republic. We also learned that this censorship apparatus was not limited to just a few federal employees, but was a whole-of-government approach that was launched to protect the Bidens, Fauci, Mayorkas, and others, while targeting Trump supporters and the disfavored. And here we are, the dust has largely settled, and we have wrested control away from would-be dictators. Pulled back the curtains and turned the sunlight on to disinfect the dark, dank corners of Washington, D.C. Yet I am not aware of anyone who created this censorship infrastructure being held accountable for the last almost 10 years of relentless, well-funded, and well-orchestrated attempt to nullify the First Amendment. Here is my question. Are any of you aware of any political leader or federal employee being held accountable, either by being reprimanded or fired, being sued, or having criminal charges brought against them for violating Americans' First Amendment rights? Mr. Schellenberger?
The only person I can think of is Nina Jankowicz, who was basically forced to step down.
She didn't get a job.
What's that?
She didn't get the job.
Yeah, she just didn't get the job.
Mr. Taibbi, are you aware of anybody being punished?
No, I can't think of anybody.
Mr. Aaron?
Based on your description, I don't.
Mr. Subramanya?
I'm not aware of any politician anywhere on the planet, anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, who's been held to account for violating people's free speech rights.
So don't you find it strange that the architects of this situation have not been held accountable for violating our rights? On his first day in office, President Trump issued an executive order prohibiting federal officials from engaging in censorship and directing reviews of previous federal involvement in censorship. And I think that's a good first step, but I don't think it's enough. I believe that Congress must act to defend the First Amendment, which is why I developed legislation with Representative Dan Bishop last Congress, now introduced in this Congress as the First Amendment Accountability Act, which aligns with the President's executive order, but it has actual teeth in it. And what my Accountability Act says, that it creates a federal version of 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, a civil rights statute. And it says that should a federal employee deprive any person of their First Amendment rights, the employee shall be held liable to that person for damages, a suit in equity, or other proper proceeding for redress, including the award of attorney's fees.
Will the gentleman yield for a friendly question?
No, I will not.
For a friendly question?
No, Mr. Aaron, do you believe that an individual employed by President Trump in the White House should be able to violate your First Amendment rights to censor your speech? Yes or no?
No, I don't think it should be censored.
So I take it that you support my First Amendment Accountability Act to make sure that such an action never happens, and if it did, that you would have a remedy to protect yourself. Is that right?
I would be happy to look at the legislation and the text you've prepared.
And as to each of the rest of you, Mr. Taibbi, Mr. Schellenberger, and Ms. Subramanya, do you believe that the First Amendment Accountability Act is a good idea?
I do.
Sounds good to me, but I'd love to read it.
I support it.
Thank you. I yield back.
Just as importantly, the chair and the rank.
Thank you. Ms. Foley, can you describe for us what lawfare is?
Lawfare is the use of legal processes, either civil or criminal, to go after a political opponent.
And Mr. Epstein, Alvin Bragg's 34-count indictment against President Trump was the first time a former president had been indicted in history. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But the facts of that case had been known for years. Isn't that also true?
Yes, and litigated.
And why did federal prosecutors then choose not to charge President Trump?
Obviously, they didn't think that the evidence substantiated any crimes.
Do we yet know what the underlying crime was that Donald Trump allegedly committed that was the basis for the convictions?
Well, obviously, the underlying New York criminal statute was interpreted broadly, but the supposition is that the president, through this alleged hush money scheme, was engaging in election crimes, and even, of course, the case directly referred to federal election crimes.
But what do you mean supposition? Didn't they have to prove that that's what he had done?
And of course, there was no unanimous jury determination on that. And in fact, there was, of course, no proof. The argument was there must have been some conspiracy with the Trump organization and others.
So they didn't prove the underlying crime, they just convicted him of something in state law. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I would also note that that based off an executive action in New York, there was a stay of these types of indictments during COVID, and there was, of course, a very aggressive reinterpretation of a stay designed to protect criminal defendants in order to go after the president.
Have you ever seen anything like that New York case in your entire years of practice?
No, never.
Were you shocked at what happened in that court?
I was, as were many in the legal academy and many practitioners.
You know, I sit here and I listen to all of the caterwauling on the other side about Elon Musk. I don't know what he has to do with anything today. I listen to all of the accusations about Russia, Russia, Russia. Boy, I wish we could retire that word someday. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. I listen to all of these, you know, this nonsense that is being spewed out there. And what I can't understand is why anyone wants to undermine our criminal or civil justice system in the manner that has been done over the last couple of years with lawfare, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. Can you understand that, Ms. Foley?
No, absolutely not. Like I said, if they can do it, if one side can do it, the other side can do it too.
Isn't that kind of what happens in our political system?
Yeah, because it's politics.
It's politics,
Right,
that's
but
right.
politics and law should be different.
Don't you think that most of the American people understand what happened in these cases? Do you really think, does anybody really think that anybody was confused or that we couldn't figure this out or we didn't even know exactly what was happening with these cases in New York and the Fani Willis cases? We all knew what was happening, right? It was to stop him from running for president. Pretty simple to figure out, isn't it? Isn't that a classic example of lawfare? Is that what we want our justice system to turn into? Again, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, is that what our Constitution is here for? Mr. Terwilliger, do you think that that's a good use of our criminal justice system?
No, ma'am.
Wow. We have focused a lot on how politically motivated the state and local officials can have been when they target our federal officials, but we also need to consider the Biden DOJ's role in all of this that happened. For example, Mr. Epstein, what agency has Congress charged with adjudicating and enforcing federal campaign finance violations?
That's the Federal Election Commission.
All right, and from a congressional perspective, why should every member of this committee care about the proper enforcement and interpretation of a law Congress drafted? Isn't that our role?
Absolutely, they should.
In Mr. Bragg's prosecution, did the Biden DOJ enforce its exclusive jurisdiction?
No. In fact, we know that public integrity section at the Department of Justice has historically prosecuted election crimes. And yet here, they ceded authority to a state prosecutor.
So they allowed a state court to prosecute a former president in a case that the court had no jurisdiction. Is that fair?
Yeah, and it's, Miss Congresswoman, it's even worse because we have a tradition of federal agencies, even if you want to say that federal agencies have expertise in these questions, we certainly know that state courts don't have expertise in kind of federal questions relating to elections.
They wouldn't have developed it because they don't have jurisdiction.
Exactly, and that's the meaning of jurisdiction.
And then when you bring in Mr. Colangelo and his involvement with this, we know that the Biden administration was knee-deep in the prosecution of Mr. Trump in New York, don't we?
Yeah, and in fact, as America First Legal found out, and of course these documents were withheld under privilege protections, but 36 records existed of communications between the District Attorney of New York, that office, and the Attorney General's office. Yet Attorney General Garland came to this committee and said that there were no communications.
Thank you, Mr. Epstein.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady from Wyoming. I'll now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Roy.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your courtesy, and thank you, Ms. Hageman and Ms. Hoyle, for being here and for your testimony. I appreciate you all coming before the Rules Committee. Ms. Hageman, I thought I want to perhaps spend a bit of time unpacking some of the conversation you just had with Mr. Norman. We both represent Western states, Rocky Mountain West, of course, from congressional neighbors, if you will. I represent northwestern Colorado, as you know, a long border with Wyoming. And I understand that you held a town hall pretty recently in Wyoming. I don't know if
10 of them.
What was that?
10.
10 of them.
Town halls.
So I am curious, so you've held a lot of them, way more than a lot of your colleagues on that side of the aisle, I will say, so I appreciate that. I've held 10 as well in my district, but I'm wondering, what are you hearing at those town halls? What do folks, just give us a sense of the flavor of what folks are concerned about in the state of Wyoming.
They're concerned about energy production, making sure that we get back to energy independence, which is part of the reason why I think it's so important to rename this to Gulf of America in light of the amount of production. It accounts for about 15% of our oil and gas production in the country. So that's one of the big issues that you hear wherever you go, whether you're in town halls or meetings, is the importance of protecting our energy industry. I hear a lot about ensuring that we are implementing the agenda and the policies that Donald Trump ran on.
Okay.
This being one of them. I think people are,
So wait,
again,
can
I think people
Can I just
again,
ask you a question on that? Let me just make sure because I understood the first part. You said energy dominance, protecting the energy industry is something you hear from folks that you represent in Wyoming, and I appreciate that. And then you said implementing President Trump's policies. So you're saying that there are people at your town halls who are demanding that you rename the Gulf of Mexico?
I think it's across the entire board.
Has that come up at any of your town halls?
Actually, it has.
It has?
Yes, and it's also come up in the meetings
The
that I've
people
had
of
with
Wyoming
people.
were demanding that you rename the Gulf of Mexico?
See, you use the word demand.
Oh,
Very
asking.
few people come to me and
Imploring.
demand anything.
Well, I guess
What people say is that they want us to implement the agenda that Donald Trump
that
ran on.
includes
And this
renaming
is
the
one
Gulf of
them,
Mexico?
Because it has to do with pride in America and what America stands
Representative,
for.
I would
So-
just simply say,
Well, you can argue with me as
I'm
much
not,
as
it's not
you'd
about an
like
argument.
to.
I would love to attend one of the,
I would
guess
welcome you to attend one
I
of
am
my town
asking you an
halls.
honest question, and you're welcome to answer it any way you'd like. You're telling me in this committee that at one of your town halls,
I
and
have
that-
said at my town halls
let me
and
finish my
meetings-
question.
At
You'll have
town
an
halls and my meetings.
You'll have an opportunity to answer. Let me
Okay.
finish my question. You've held 10 town halls
Yes.
across Wyoming.
Yes.
And at those town halls, Wyoming residents, constituents have said to you, I would like you to rename the Gulf of Mexico. Has that happened?
Yes.
That has happened?
At the meetings that I have held, as I have said to you repeatedly now, I not only am holding town halls, I'm holding meetings with my constituents.
Sure.
The entire agenda that President Trump ran on, they've talked to me about no taxes on tips.
That's not,
They
I'm
have
not
talked
asking
to
you about
me-
no
they-
taxes
they have
on
talked
tips.
to me- They have
That's
talked
not
to
the
me
bill that
about
you're here testifying
renaming
about.
the Gulf
The
of
bill-
America. They have talked to me about the oil and gas development
Well,
that we have down there.
I
They have
think
talked
it's a
about
shame.
exporting energy out of
I'll
the Gulf
reclaim
of
my time
America.
because I think it's a shame.
And I would.
So you're
would-
calling me,
would
I
remind-
think what you're
I
saying
think-
is you don't believe what I'm
Hang on.
saying.
I'm
Hang
saying
on,
that
hang on.
I would love to come to a town hall, and so I'll certainly look forward to, what we may do is, we may just consider doing a town hall in Wyoming myself so that I can get a better sense from Republicans, Democrats,
You're welcome.
unaffiliated people of Wyoming as to what their priorities are. My sense is, I'm not disagreeing with you that there are many folks in Wyoming who believe that the Congress ought to be pursuing policies that President Trump supports. What I am suggesting is that I find it a little bit unbelievable that of all the issues that the American people are dealing with, that my constituents are dealing with, that your constituents are dealing with, that at these town halls, renaming the Gulf of Mexico was a top priority. I suspect that the people of your
one
state,
of the things
I'm
that
not
you're
done
ignoring-
talking, you'll have an opportunity to respond. I don't believe that the people in your state, nor the people in mine, would identify renaming the Gulf of Mexico as their top priority. And I find it absurd that we have to engage in this discussion to act as though this is anything but abnormal, that this is sort of just regular order, that yes, in the first 4 months of the 119th Congress, the Republican majority has decided that this is so important that we ought to take floor time to rename the Gulf of Mexico, notwithstanding all of the other policies that I suspect many of your supporters, many of the citizens that you represent are passionate about. I find that hard to believe. And apparently I'm the only one, or at least you and I disagree about this, but I suspect my colleagues, maybe on this side of the aisle, concur in that assessment. But in any event, I am happy to give you an opportunity to respond. And
So one of the things, Mr. Neguse, that you are ignoring is the fact that the state of Wyoming and my constituents in Wyoming have a very close connection to the Gulf of America because we are one of the largest energy producers in the nation. We are the largest coal producer. We're the eighth largest oil and gas producer. Our resources, our oil and gas and coal are actually exported out of the Gulf of America. So it is something that is at the forefront of the minds of the people in the state of Wyoming. I also want to point out one thing.
What does this bill do to help them?
I want to point out one other thing that you did, which is a very clever trick, which is that you asked me if I'd been asked any questions, and I told you that I had. And when you did your soliloquy there at the end, you accused me of being dishonest and disingenuous by then converting that to being the top priority. I didn't say that it was the top priority, but I did say that I was asked questions, and there has been discussions.
So let's have this semantics debate then.
Not only in the meetings that I've held, but when I have met with people who actually have a direct connection to the Gulf of America. So I think what you're trying to imply is that Wyoming has no interest in the Gulf of America, when in fact the state of Wyoming, with our energy resources,
Ms. Hageman, have you
have
testified in front of this?
a lot of
Okay,
interest
I've been generous
in the
with my
Gulf of
time.
America.
Have you testified in front of this committee yet this year? Is this your first time testifying in front of this committee?
Probably this year, but not last year.
No, I'm asking you this year. I'm saying in the last 4 months, since the 119th Congress has started, this is your first time testifying, right?
I think so.
You're chairwoman of the Water, Fisheries, and Wildlife Subcommittee, are you not?
Yes.
And this is the first bill that you have decided to present to this committee on behalf of the state that you serve. So this notion, I'm saying to you, whether you or the Republican majority have picked this as a priority is besides the point. Clearly, this is what you all have decided to spend your time on in the opening months of the 119th Congress. Maybe that's what the people of, I guess, is what you're testifying to today, is that the people of Wyoming expect that from you and they support that. I can certainly tell you that in Colorado, of all of the issues that are important to the residents of my state, Gulf of America renaming does not crack the top 3, the top 10 of issues that my constituents care about. You clearly feel differently. That's your prerogative. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, for his time questioning.
Move that the committee report in favor to the House. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 3.
Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming, Ms. Hageman, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I speak in favor of H.R. 3492, the Protect Children's Innocence Act. Mr. Chairman, today we are facing one of the greatest crises of our time, child abuse disguised as medical intervention. Children are being coerced by adults in positions of authority into life-altering gender transition procedures without a full understanding of the meaning or impact. Democrats have embraced an extreme position on gender and the biological differences between boys and girls and men and women. They are clearly more interested in promoting radical leftist policies than protecting children from harm. The radical left has deliberately distorted the public debate surrounding what they refer to as gender-affirming care, which is really nothing of the sort. Instead of accurately describing the procedures as harmful, life-altering, and barbaric, which they are, the left deceptively frames the procedures as being necessary to improve the health and well-being of children. By advocating for these procedures and this level of medical intervention, Democrats are indoctrinating children and encouraging them to make life-altering decisions about their body involving hormones and surgery, jeopardizing their health. Let's call this for what it is. So-called gender-affirming care is the genital mutilation and chemical castration of children. It is not life-saving care, it is child abuse. All evidence points to the fact that these barbaric procedures, including puberty blockers, hormones, and surgeries, are a form of genital mutilation. More and more individuals who were convinced to go down this road are now coming forward to share their horrific experiences of being used as experiments of the medical establishment. The majority of these brave individuals are girls and women. The first rule of medicine is do no harm, yet those in the medical community performing these grotesque procedures on children are committing serious harm. Thankfully, doctors across the United States and in other countries are also beginning to take a stand against those in the medical community who insist that these are, quote, life-saving procedures and should not be questioned. Thankfully, my friend and colleague, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, stepped up and introduced the Protect Children's Innocent Act. I thank Representative Greene for her important work on this legislation and for her tireless efforts to protect our children from this evil. The Protect Children's Innocence Act will hold those accountable who perform or attempt to perform genital mutilation or chemical castration on children. The bill expands covered offenses to include the bodily mutilation and the chemical castration of a minor. Victims are protected by ensuring that they cannot be arrested or prosecuted if one of these or other prohibited procedures are performed on them. This issue is really quite simple. Do not force children into making decisions they will not be able to reverse. Do not make these children lifelong patients dependent on the medical system. A civilized society protects its children first, and that is what this bill does. In short, do not abuse our nation's children. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We know that one of the basic tactics in every authoritarian's playbook is to pick out a small minority group in society and scapegoat them, castigate them, demonize them, deny them basic rights and freedoms, dehumanize them, deny their very existence. Jews and gypsies in Nazi Germany, Christians in Pakistan today, African Americans in Jim Crow America, gay people in Putin's Russia, Uyghurs and Tibetans in China. Just pick out a minority and mobilize the society against them, and you won't have to answer tough questions about your own authoritarianism, your own corruption. Mr. Chairman, I had a very disturbing meeting at the beginning of this Congress with parents of transgender kids who came to see me from my district. And I was prepared for them to be lobbying me on this or that, and I began to talk about different legislation, and they said, no, we know that you're with us on the legislation. We're here to ask you how far you think this campaign is going to go, because a lot of families have started to leave the country and are talking about leaving the country, going to Spain or Portugal or France, somewhere where their families can feel safe. And so I was so taken aback by the conversation and their true alarm and what they're reporting about their kids that I have followed this issue very closely since the new administration started. And indeed, the campaign of demonization and vilification and scapegoating began on the very first day in office. President Trump issued an executive order denying the very existence of transgender Americans. That's an order that George Orwell would have recognized well. He purged government websites of any reference to transgender Americans, just disappearing them. He issued an executive order directing that Americans serving honorably in the armed forces for years or decades be summarily kicked out for being transgender. That's right, a guy who avoided military service himself because of his serious problem with bone spurs, and who told Howard Stern that his Vietnam was trying to avoid sexually transmitted diseases at the discos and clubs of Manhattan, is now kicking out of the military thousands of honorable, patriotic Americans, more than 1,000 at least, who've already been kicked out, people who have faithfully and bravely served their country because of Donald Trump's intent and determination to scapegoat these people. He's threatened to defund schools just for supporting trans students. He's trying to bully schools into banning trans girls from playing sports with other girls. And understand what the Biden policy was. The Biden policy was to leave it to the school districts. No categorical ban on transgender kids across the country, across different school districts, but it's up to each elementary school, middle school, high school to work out those issues for themselves. Trump's ordered transgender women incarcerated in women's facilities to be immediately transferred out and placed in male facilities, putting their bodily safety into jeopardy. Today, during Pride Month, no less, which is not to imply that our colleagues are necessarily celebrating Pride Month, but our colleagues go one step further now in this cruel campaign. They seek to deny transgender youth access to potentially life-saving health care, access to the treatments and medications prescribed to them by their physicians in accordance with the wishes of their family, their parents. And they do this while they try to pass the big, beautiful bill that will cut health care to more than 14 million Americans. For the life of me, I don't understand how a party which prides itself so much on the individual's right to make his or her own decisions, the family's right to make the decisions for their own kids, so much so that they would reject the obligation of anybody to get a vaccine in the country at this point for any purpose. I understand it's a principled position. Now you want to say that you're going to make a decision for a family and their kids about how they're to be raised and what health care they need? Big Brother loves their children more than they do? Is that what you're telling us? I mean, give me a break. The so-called Protect Children's Innocence Act, introduced by that famous advocate of public health and children's safety, Marjorie Taylor Greene, would make it a crime for doctors just to care for their transgender patients in accordance with the wishes of their families. All major medical associations in America agree evidence-based gender-affirming care is necessary and in many instances life-saving for transgender youth. And while my colleagues across the aisle today will likely tell you there are young people across the country being mutilated by evil, malicious doctors, that is not the real story. Like all medical care, gender-affirming care is tailored to the age and the unique needs of individual patients in consultation with the families, medical doctors, mental health professionals. And I'm sorry, I trust them more than I trust Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has shown nothing but a spectacular disrespect for scientific professionalism and expertise in the United States of America. Let's not turn the Congress of the United States into a supreme medical board for the country that will override not only the states and the localities and the medical associations and the physicians, but even the wishes of the parents. I wish one of my colleagues would explain that to me, how you expect Big Brother to make better decisions than the families of the kids involved in this situation. It is to elevate your ideological dogma over the needs of real people. Let's stop attacking transgender kids. Let's instead fight to support the programs all of us need. My colleagues voted for a bill that threatens health care for over 37 million children who rely on Medicaid and CHIPS, the Children's Health Insurance Program. They supported cutting benefits for nearly 15 million children who rely on SNAP benefits to get adequate nutrition in America. They want to gut the Department of Education, which ensures nearly 26 million low-income students and 7.5 million students with disabilities will have access to meaningful educational opportunities. If we want to talk about children in America, let's talk about children in America. Let's not demonize and scapegoat less than 0.5% of the population. Somewhere around 1 million people in America are transgender. So let's not pounce on them and demonize them and vilify them and the people who love them and who are trying to take care of them. This so-called Protecting Children's Innocence Act from Marjorie Taylor Greene is the latest effort to attack, demean, scapegoat transgender Americans. I won't stand for it. I urge all of our colleagues to oppose this, and I yield back.
Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Without objection, the amendment.
Gentlelady from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment. Point of order reserved by the gentleman from Arizona.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a
No, be
substitute.
considered as read. The gentlelady from Washington is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been a bizarre conversation, and it's very difficult to engage with it if you're actually engaged in any kind of reality about what gender-affirming care is and who trans people are. And we've had all kinds of things be said here, words be used. Republicans are bringing yet another despicable bill that attacks the transgender community. And the gentlelady who introduced the bill is calling practices barbaric, but she can't tell us even where the definition she introduced came from. What is barbaric is this legislation. What is barbaric is targeting trans kids in this country who are not doing you any harm. Show me a trans kid who's doing you harm. And then tell me how many of you are parents that would do anything that you could to protect your kids and to make sure that they didn't commit suicide, that they were actually able to engage in the world in a healthy way. Tell me what you wouldn't do for your children. Because when you introduce legislation like this, it is not only stupid legislation, it is cruel, it is mean, and it interferes with your own conservative principles. You really want to take away the ability to allow parents to make decisions about their own kids' medical situation with their doctor? That's what Republicans want to do? Now, I know we're all inconsistent in different ways, and there are people on that side who have been consistent on issues of debt and deficit. Both of us on either side of the aisle have taken up issues of privacy. This is a giant inconsistency in the Republican Party right now. You are supposed to be the party of limited government that doesn't get in the way of parents making decisions for their own kids. Remember parental rights? Remember individual rights? But that's not what you're doing. And don't just take it from me. In 2018, when the anti-trans political attacks were beginning, Barbara Comstock, who is a Virginia Republican who served in Congress, many of us knew her, said, quote, "It opens a Pandora's box when you don't allow the parents and the doctors to make this decision." Who are you to get in the way of a parent making a decision about their own kid's health? And, you know, when you talk about, I wrote some things down as you were talking because this whole thing is ridiculous. You want to talk about the industrial medical complex in healthcare? Well, let's talk about that. Why don't we go after those for-profit private insurance companies that have taken over healthcare and made 1 in 3 Americans have medical debt? You want to talk about irreversible psychological damage, another thing that you over there are trying to say about our kids and what we make decisions about? Well, let's talk about cutting nutrition assistance. You want to cut nutrition assistance, $2 a meal, from kids who are hungry. That's what your big bad betrayal bill does. You want to talk about irreversible psychological damage? Let's talk about child abuse. Let's talk about separating moms and dads from their kids, immigrants, locking them up indefinitely. That's what you just put in the bill that we voted through the Judiciary Committee. So what the hell are we doing here, Mr. Chairman? Let's be a little consistent and precise and stop attacking trans kids. That's all this does. Now, I do have an amendment here, but it was all, I just have been listening to this and I cannot believe what this conversation has been about. My amendment would allow medical professionals to continue delivering health care to young trans people when it is considered a best practice. It recognizes that this care is safe, widely accepted, appropriate, medically necessary, and most importantly, it allows transgender people to live safely and authentically as themselves. Any parent over there, do you want kids to commit suicide? Is that what you'd like? Do you want them to not get the counseling that they need, because that's what gender-affirming care is. In very rare cases, there is surgery that is prescribed. But you guys make it sound like this is some giant, terrible thing that parents are doing for their kids. You're parents. Why are you getting in the way? Why are you letting government get in the way of parents making decisions about their own kids with their own doctors? It is absolutely outrageous, and you should, at a minimum, vote for this amendment. And the chairman is always generous with me because we have spoken about this issue. And he knows damn well what it means to be a parent and to protect your child. And I'm gonna do that every frickin' day that I'm here in this committee when you bring up these ridiculous, barbaric bills that target trans kids.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming.
First of all, we're not claiming kids are doing us harm. We are trying to protect them from harm. And protecting children is not inconsistent with our conservative philosophy. We are not mobilizing against our children. We are mobilizing to protect them. We are not demonizing children. We are trying to protect them from people who seek to use medical intervention to erase the essence of their very being. I want to remind the committee that this bill, H.R. 3492, is actually an amendment to existing law, 18 U.S.C. Code Section 116, which was introduced by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, and it was entitled Female Genital Mutilation. And the very purpose of it was to prohibit female genital mutilation. It was passed. It was a bipartisan bill that was passed. This is merely an amendment to that bill.
Would the gentlelady yield?
No, I'm not finished yet.
I wanted to ask you if you know what female genital mutilation is.
I am not finished. If you will remember, at the time that this was brought forward in 2020, and even its predecessor in the 1990s, it was because of the issue of young girls, young women who were having, their parents were the ones who were taking them to have the female genital mutilation. So when you talk about this being a parental right to obtain medical intervention for their minor child, the very law, the very statute that we are amending specifically identifies and recognizes the fact that sometimes parents don't have the best interests of their children at heart, and that's why on a bipartisan basis in 2020 there was a law that was passed that made female genital mutilation illegal. So I want to make sure that people understand that that is the very purpose of the bill that we are considering as an amendment to an existing statute. I also want to point out that throughout history we have examples where the medical community has been so blatantly wrong in terms of the advice that they were giving. For example, in the 1930s, recommending that women smoke cigarettes, it will make them feel better while they're pregnant. We have the situation of the radium, recommending the use of radium, lobotomies from the 1930s through the 1950s. The gentleman who invented lobotomies actually received the Nobel Prize in medicine for that. We don't do lobotomies anymore. We recognize how barbaric that procedure is. Hormone replacement therapy without risk disclosures, forced coerced sterilization. We have a history of that. We just went through COVID-19, for goodness sakes. We had Anthony Fauci lying to us every which way from Tuesday about that masks are unnecessary and that we need to have masks and that you have to have the vaccine and the vaccine isn't going to cause any problems. And now we have all of the evidence demonstrating that the vaccines cause incredible medical problems for a certain subset of our population. Yet we were lied to over and over and over and over again just during COVID-19, and it was the medical field that did it. It's why there is such a distrust in the medical field right now. So when you talk about how there are these medical protocols and this is best practices, that's most likely based upon what is the Dutch protocol. The Dutch protocol that has been cited so many times by Democrats has been entirely discounted as being a situation where they actually cooked the books. You want to know how they cooked the books? According to a 2023 study, the premise of the Dutch study is flawed on account account of 3 methodological biases that undermine the research. These include 1, dropping subjects from the study who experienced unsuccessful results. Number 2, altering the gender dysphoria scoring mechanism after the treatments were conducted in order to guarantee a significant post-surgical drop in gender dysphoria scores. And number 3, compromising findings of psychological benefits of hormone therapy by conflating the results of several treatments and factors such as gender reassignment therapy and psychological maturation. The results of this Dutch study have never been replicated, despite the fact that there have been many efforts to do so. So when you talk about best practices, when you talk about the parents being the ones who get to make this decision and then attack us and make it as though we don't care about children, that we don't care about their well-being, the very purpose of this bill is to protect children from the people who would harm them through this type of medical intervention. With that, I yield back.
The lady yields back. The ranking member is recognized to speak on the amendment.
Thank you kindly. I rise to oppose the amendment. The gentlelady from Wyoming, I'm afraid, makes a series of arguments. Oh, we're still on the Jayapal amendment. I support very strongly the Jayapal amendment, and thank the gentlelady for offering such an eloquent defense of it. But in answer to the criticism from the gentlelady from Wyoming, she makes a series of arguments that completely contradict her own position. She says, for example, that there have been all kinds of changes in our understanding of vaccines, which sounds like it would be an argument against having a national compulsory mandatory vaccine for everybody in the country, which of course we didn't have during COVID-19. But the logic of what she's doing today would lead us precisely to that, because it would say, let's let the federal government decide for everybody. If you don't want your kids to have the COVID-19 vaccine, too bad for you. The federal government now has the power to do it and is invited to do it, because they're saying that the United States House of Representatives and Marjorie Taylor Greene love your children more than you do. They are going to make decisions in the best interest of your child that you wouldn't make for yourself. We're going to leave it up to Marjorie Taylor Greene to do it. And that's just absolutely appalling. And so the gentlelady protests that they care about the kids more than those who would do them harm. I wonder who she's referring to, because she's got to be referring to the parents, because none of this happens without the authorization of the parents. In pretty much every state I'm aware of, I stand to be corrected if there's some state that gives it to some third-party body, but I think it's the parents who decide. But you want to overturn the authority of the parents to make medical decisions for their own children on the grounds that you're going to protect the children against the parents, which cuts completely against, I think, everything that you and other Republicans were saying about the vaccines. You didn't want government at any level, much less the federal level, deciding what was best in the best interest of the children. So this leads me to believe this profound, stunning contradiction that you don't really have the best interests of these children at heart. I'm much more drawn to what Ms. Jayapal has suggested in her amendment, which is we operate on the principle that parents are going to be acting in the best interest of the children. In fact, that's the standard in any family courtroom in the country when it comes to an award of custody. What's in the best interest of the children? And it's going to be one parent or the other, except in the most extreme and extraordinary case, right? So now Ms. Jayapal says, let the parents trust the doctors. The families that go through this question go right to the doctors and physicians and the psychiatrists to find out what is the best evidence available about what's going on. And now we take what is undoubtedly an extremely difficult situation, as all family medical situations are, and we compound it with the intrusion of the federal government for totally exploitative partisan purposes. And that is a scandal and an outrage. So let's give the families some room to make their own decisions. Let's let the states regulate medicine taking place within their own communities. Let's let the medical associations advise the state legislatures. And we don't need Big Brother doing this. If we want to help the families of America. Let's not throw 15 million people off Medicaid. Let's not be slashing SNAP benefits and cutting child nutrition in the country. And I'll yield the remainder of my time to the offerer of the amendment, the distinguished gentlelady from Washington.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I wanted to just have a conversation with you because also, if you noticed, and if we went back and looked at the transcript, the gentlelady from Wyoming actually said, we can't trust parents. In your comments, you said parents make decisions that are wrong for the kids. So I feel like you kind of answered the question for me about whether or not we should trust parents. And all of a sudden, the Republican Party, that was the party of saying limited government, we don't want you telling us what to do as parents, all of a sudden now, you are saying that you don't trust the parents. It's clear to me that you don't trust the medical establishment, even though every major medical organization, the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, all of these organizations are saying that this is care that is supported, and yet you're saying you don't trust them either. So I think what the gentlelady is saying is she's the only one that can be trusted to make the decisions. The Republican Party is the only one that can be trusted because you can't trust the parents and you can't trust the medical associate. Is that your understanding as well?
I think we all have to trust Marjorie Taylor Greene is the point of the legislation here. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, without objection, I would like to enter into the record a systematic review of outcomes of hormonal treatments in youths with gender dysphoria from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden.
Without objection.
The independent review of gender identity services for children and young people by Dr. Hilary Cass, also known as the Cass Review from the UK.
Objection.
And the treatment of pediatric gender dysphoria, review of the evidence and best practices from our own Department of Health and Senior Services dated May 1st, 2025, all of which refute the outdated, bogus, and methodologically biased so-called science embodied in the so-called WPATH and Dutch protocol. And finally, I'd like to introduce a consensus statement on the management of intersex disorders by Hughes et al., published in the Archives of Disease in Childhood. Too many times our Democrat colleagues like to conflate the idea of gender identity with these unfortunate children who have genetic sexual birth defects, and that likewise I would like to, without objection, enter into the record.
Without objection. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield to Ms. Hageman.
Thank you. I just want to read the current statute, 18 U.S.C. Section 116. Whoever knowingly, being the parent, guardian, or caretaker of a person who has not attained the age of 18 years, facilitates or consents to the female genital mutilation of such person. And then it goes on to say, shall be fined under this title, imprisoned not more than 10 years or both. Again, this was a bill that was authored by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee. So obviously, and it also goes on to say in subsection C, it shall not be a defense to a prosecution under this section that female genital mutilation is required as a matter of religion, custom, tradition, ritual, or standard practice. So obviously, Representative Sheila Jackson Lee recognized that there were circumstances under which the parents also could be actually guilty of doing things that were really not in the best interest and were very destructive to their children. So again, I'm just reading from 18 U.S.C.
Would the gentlelady yield?
In a moment, I will.
Okay.
18 U.S.C. Section 116, Representative Lee obviously recognized that there were circumstances where it was actually not only did she not trust the parents, she thought that they ought to be prosecuted for having their child doing female genital mutilation on their children. So when you say we don't trust the parents, for the most part, I do trust the parents, I do. But I think that there are also circumstances where I do not believe these kinds of life-altering decisions should be made by minors. As they are adults, that is a different circumstance. But we are talking here specifically about minors, and I think it's very important that we not conflate the two. So again, the existing statute that we are amending would fine and imprison parents for kind of the same thing. So with that,
the
yes, I will
gentlelady
yield.
I would just wanted to know who, if the parents shouldn't make these decisions, who should? I mean, who gets to make the decision?
Well, the bill
Nobody?
says that we cannot do these treatments on minors.
So no
That's-
matter
that's
what a
the
parent
purpose.
thinks,
That's right.
this bill would not allow parents to make any decision about gender-affirming care as it relates to their children in consultation with their doctors.
It's specifically defined in the bill.
Yeah,
that's
so,
exactly
but for
right.
gender-affirming care, as you talk about
That's
it
exactly right.
in the bill, you're saying parents would not be allowed and would actually have to allow the federal government, would have to yield to the federal government, saying the federal government is going to make all these decisions about anything that qualifies as gender-affirming care.
Anything that's identified and
Right,
defined in this bill.
and are you aware that in gender-affirming care, are you aware of the things that are contained within gender-affirming care?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so you know that counseling and mental health is part of gender-affirming care, correct?
That's not what is, that's not what's forbidden in this bill.
But it is
That
a part of gender-affirming care. You have a
That's
very
not what's
broad,
forbidden in this bill.
but you have a very broad.
That is not what's forbidden in this bill. Don't distort what's in the bill.
I'm not.
Don't argue with me by
Time belongs
distorting
to
what's
the
in the
gentlelady
bill.
from Wyoming.
So can I engage with another question here with you?
Yes, as
Okay,
long as
great.
you don't distort what's in the bill.
No, I'm not going to. I'm going to go back and find the references for what I'm talking about. You talked about female genital mutilation, but your own bill defines female genital mutilation as any procedure performed for non-medical reasons. So in your own bill, you are recognizing that medical procedures are not contained within the definition of female genital mutilation. And yet now you're expanding that definition. And I gotta say, if Sheila Jackson Lee were here, she would, I don't know how to recreate how she would be. I think she's probably rolling in her grave right now. God rest her soul.
Well, you know,
Because
she's not
she
here.
was
What I'm doing
talking
is
about
just
something
going on
very
what she wrote.
specific.
I'm
And-
just going on what she wrote.
But your own bill makes the distinction of what female genital mutilation is, and it doesn't apply to this. So
It's called,
I yield back.
the bill here is very clearly genital and bodily mutilation of a minor, chemical castration of a minor. That is what is prohibited by this bill. That's what's
Okay.
prohibited. So you can't bring in all of these other things and pretend that they're in this bill, because they're not. That's what's in this bill. That's what this bill
The gentlelady
prohibits.
is actually the one who's bringing in a lot of things that are not contained in any medical definitions and assessments. In fact, you introduced definitions that we're not even sure where those came from. I yield, if the time is done.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Alabama yields back. Question occurs. Gentlelady from Vermont.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, what I find in these conversations, and we've had these debates over transgender Americans repeatedly in this committee. And inevitably, it comes back to somebody on the other side of the aisle hurling invectives at us, saying that this is left-wing ideology. And I just want to bring us back to a hearing that we had on transgender Americans in this committee, in which sitting at the table there was a woman who identified as a conservative Republican Christian. That's how she self-identified. And she was saying to all of you who were on the committee at that time, it was last Congress, and she basically said, "Why are you up in my business? Why are you trying to make decisions for me and my child?" And earlier today, and I know we've been here a long time, earlier today, my colleague, Mr. Roy, said, you know, we shouldn't be busybody legislators all up in everybody's business. And he said, we already have too many damn laws. What are we doing here? And I'm just sitting here thinking about the courage that it took for that woman to come here to say to all of you, a Republican Christian conservative, that this actually isn't about politics. This isn't about party. This isn't about left-wing ideology. This is about her job as a parent, making sure she's getting the health care that her kid needs and deserves. And she was completely and totally open with us about the kind of despair that her child was in. the kind of anxiety and depression her child was racked with. And she said it was difficult for her. It was difficult for her and her family, especially in the community that they lived in, to stand with their child and to make this decision. And so I've just had it. I've had it with it constantly coming back to somehow that this is a Democratic issue. There are transgender people living in every single district here, and they identify as Republican and they identify as Democratic, and some of them don't vote at all because they can't stand that their government is being weaponized against them. So can we stop this nonsense? You want to have control over our conversations with our doctors. You want to meddle in the relationship that parents have with their child and with their doctors. And it is so difficult, week after week after week, for you to continue to attack such a small minority of people in this country that just want to live their lives. I don't know what the obsession is, honestly. Because I can tell you, the transgender people in my district, they don't want your help, member from Wyoming. They don't want your help. And their parents sure as hell do not want your help. They want to be able to make decisions in conjunction with their children's doctors. And I just find it so outrageous and insulting that you come here and you claim that this is about a partisan issue. It's not. It's about any child being able to get the health care that their parent deems is necessary to keep them alive. I do not know why, with all of the issues that we have in healthcare right now, from the price of insulin to the fact that we are rolling back all the work that was done on inhalers, to PBMs, to the fact that healthcare systems across this country are falling apart, that this is the topic, once again, that you choose to take up. It makes no sense that this is what we're spending our time at. And I can tell you, because I talk to parents, not just in my district, but who reach out to me who say, thank goodness someone is standing up for us in that committee, because once again, they're demonizing us and dehumanizing us in the language that they're using. Thank goodness you're standing up for us. They can't stand the fact that their own government is spending precious time in committee, once again, weaponizing government against them, and they just want to get the health care that they need and deserve. I yield back.
Back, gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I've been pondering the question that the gentlelady from Washington posed. What would we not do for our children? That's an important question. Well, for one thing, we would not mutilate them. When I was 6, I wanted to be a pirate. I was fortunate enough not to have parents who would have removed a leg and an eye so that I could feel better about myself when I was a child. I don't think I would have felt the same way turning 18. So yes, parents are the fundamental custodians of their children. They have a fundamental right to make the decisions over their children's welfare, health, and upbringing. But there are certain things we don't allow parents to do. You can't starve your kids to death. You can't beat your kids to death. You can't withhold life-saving procedures from your kids. Such acts are considered child endangerment. And if you cross that line, society steps in to protect the basic welfare of the child. Now, that all changes at 18. We've decided as a society that at 18, you can now take control of your own welfare and your own future. Your parents no longer control your welfare, and as a society, we no longer act in place of your parents on these questions. At 18, you're a grown-up. If you want to be a pirate, you can be a pirate. All you have to do is find a doctor willing to take off your leg and poke out an eye. There are cases of grown-ups who choose to be lizards. They have their tongues split, their horns implanted, and all sorts of other mutilations that wouldn't be permissible even if the parents decreed it. But at 18, if you want to be a different sex than you are, you can be. At 18, these decisions pass to you. But until then, We give broad latitude to parents as long as their decisions do not imperil the life of the child or expose them to permanent life-altering deformations. And this is such a matter, and it stuns so many people that the Democrats can't see that. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to the bill, and I also yield my time, or yield some time, to the gentlelady from Washington.
The question on the table is the amendment from the gentlelady from Washington.
Yes, which I know Mr. Johnson supports. Thank you so much for yielding. Mr. McClintock, I think you were saying that if a parent makes a decision for gender-affirming care in consultation with their kid's doctor, that could be considered mutilation. And I think the examples you gave don't reflect the reality, because you talked about beating kids and things that all the medical associations agree are abuse of kids. What you're doing is adding a word here, mutilation, to your perspective of what gender-affirming care is. That is just your perspective. It is not medically based fact. And I think you have to consider, and I think the Republican Party has to consider the struggle that you're having right now about the size and scope of government. And I think the conservatives are losing. You're certainly losing on the size of spending, because you kicked 16 million Americans off of health care, cut nutrition assistance by $300 billion, and set up massive cuts to Social Security. Also, you could give $5 trillion in tax breaks to the wealthiest billionaires and corporations, and oh, by the way, increase the deficit by trillions. And at least my friends Mr. Massey and Mr. Roy are consistent on this. But with this bill, you're really in very dangerous territory, because the party that believes in individual rights and parental rights wants big government to get right in there between a parent and their child's doctor and assign words that have no medical basis to procedures that you simply don't like. You don't like them. You don't want them for your kids. I get that. Listen, this was all pretty new to me when I first started to learn about it for my own family's personal reasons. And there was a lot to learn. And I would say to all the Americans out there, I empathize with something that is new and that Republicans are just doing everything they can to scare you. And so talk to people, read actual studies, don't listen to them. Like, go and research what gender-affirming care is. Find out that, first of all, it includes lots of things, and they are all care that has been approved by major medical organizations. And understand that surgery is a very tiny piece of it. That's what we spent most of this time talking about on this committee. But at the core, this is a cruel, cruel campaign of misinformation, of fear-mongering, of distorting what healthcare looks like for a population that is less than 1/2 of 1% of all Americans. That's what we've spent this whole time talking about. And so I want to go back to what my amendment would do. My amendment would allow medical professionals to continue delivering health care to young trans people when it is considered a best practice. And my amendment recognizes that that care is safe, it's widely accepted, it's appropriate, it's medically necessary, and most importantly, it allows transgender people to live safely and authentically. Now, I can tell you for a fact that these decisions about care in trans families are made really thoughtfully and with a lot of debate and discussion and deliberation. And all of the trans young people that I know, and I know many of them, go through months or years of consultations. with their parents, with their medical providers, before they're even able to access care. And there is no standard of care out there that recommends any medical interventions before puberty. So I would just say to people who are afraid, I understand why you're afraid, because my colleagues on the other side are doing everything they can to make you afraid and to try and blame trans kids for every woe that you face. And let me tell you, trans kids did not raise your rent. Trans kids did not make your grocery prices go higher. Billionaires did. Millionaires did. Republicans who continue to funnel tax breaks to those people did that. So just leave our kids alone and let parents make the decisions that they need to make about their kids' health care with their doctors, by themselves, without big government making those decisions for them. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The question occurs on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Washington. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. In opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not adopted.
Could we have a recorded vote, please, Mr.
Recorded vote being requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Issa? Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes no. Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Massey? Mr. Massey votes no. Mr. Roy? Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Gooden? Mr. Van Drew? Mr. Nels? Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore votes no. Mr. Kiley? Ms. Hageman? Ms. Hageman votes no. Ms. Lee? Mr. Hunt? Mr. Fry? Mr. Grothman? Mr. Grothman votes no. Mr. Knott? Mr. Harris? Mr. Harris votes no. Mr. Onder? Mr. Onder votes no. Mr. Schmidt? Mr. Schmidt votes no. Mr. Gill? Mr. Baumgardner? Mr. Raskin? Mr. Raskin votes aye. Mr. Nadler? Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren? Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson votes aye. Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Ms. Jayapal? Ms. Jayapal votes aye. Mr. Correa? Ms. Scanlon? Mr. Neguse? Ms. McBath? Ms. Ross? Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Ballant? Ms. Ballant votes aye. Mr. Garcia? Mr. Garcia votes aye. Ms. Kamlager-Dove? Ms. Kamlager-Dove votes aye. Mr. Moskowitz? Mr. Goldman? Ms. Crockett? Mr. Issa, you're not recorded. Mr. Issa votes no. Mr. Chairman, there are 8 ayes and 12 noes.
The amendment is not adopted. Who seeks recognition? Gentlelady from...
Yield my remaining time to the gentlelady from Wyoming, Representative Hageman.
Thank you, Representative Stauber. I have just a couple of comments to make in response to the ranking member's comments. First of all, it's apparent now, and it was apparent when we addressed this a couple of years ago in the last session, that my colleagues on the other side failed to do their research and failed to actually understand what recovery plans are. I'm holding in my hand the Wyoming Grizzly Bear Management Plan that was issued in May of 2016. And if you actually ever bothered to read these documents and understand how the state of Wyoming manages wildlife, and especially endangered or threatened species, what you would find is that we actually have tribal consultation built into the plans themselves. We don't ignore tribal consultation. It's a very important part of the entire management that we undertake in managing threatened and wildlife species, as well as other species, not just those that are threatened or endangered. According to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service itself, the greater Yellowstone ecosystem is, quote, saturated with grizzly bears, which is why we are now seeing them in areas they have not historically been. Just a few numbers. There are 9 full-time Wyoming Game and Fish Department staff that are assigned to work on grizzly bears. 9 that we pay for. There are 51 scientific articles that the Game and Fish staff have written or co-written on grizzly bears in the past 15 years, including peer-reviewed papers and technical reports. There isn't anyone in the Fish and Wildlife Service that has the expertise that the employees for the Wyoming Game and Fish have when it comes to managing and protecting grizzly bears. 200 is the average number of grizzlies born each year in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So the hyperbolic claims that they're going to poof, disappear is absolutely inaccurate. 231 is the average number of verified conflicts with grizzly bears each year in Wyoming. One almost every single day, we have verified conflicts. We have people who have been killed by the grizzly bears. Hunters, hikers, backpackers, campers have been killed by grizzly bears in my state. They are saturated, they far exceed the recovery goals, and it is time to delist them. There are 266 different plant and animal species that grizzly bears eat in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. In other words, they have a huge impact on the ecosystem and on other species as well. Those are just a few of the statistics related to the grizzly population, and it is again for these reasons that they should be delisted.
Would the gentlelady yield for a question?
Sure.
Do the tribal nations in the greater Yellowstone area agree with you that devolving this back to the state with its, whatever it says about tribal, that's good enough, that would protect their interests? Are they supporting your bill?
Well, I think that you would have to ask them specifically that question.
We have asked them. We asked them in the last Congress. They oppose your bill.
And what I'm going to say is they are very much involved with the management plan itself. It's stated right in the document that we have to consult with the state.
Why aren't they supporting your bill?
Consults with the tribe. You would have to ask them that, Mr. Hoffman.
We've done that, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
It doesn't change the fact that the grizzly bear is recovered under the Endangered Species Act and that they should be delisted. With that, I yield back. Or I yield to Mr. Stauber.
Thank you, Representative Hageman, for sharing those facts with us. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Discussion on the amendment is now in order to consider amendments to the ANS to H.R. 281. I recognize Ranking Member Huffman for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Huffman number 1. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pinch hitting for Ranking Member Hoyle, who was going to present this. But our colleagues across the aisle talk about best available data, following the science, but this bill actually ignores the last 8 years of best available science. The 2017 rule relied on outdated characterizations of distinct population segments, and a federal judge in Montana, not because of some whim, not because of caprice, but a federal judge in Montana followed the law and ruled the delisting rule illegal in 2018, citing the Fish and Wildlife Service's failure to consider long-term genetic effects on other populations and concerns that the decision was driven by political pressure, which it was, instead of the best available science. So since then, the Fish and Wildlife Service has worked to update its analysis to incorporate the genetic connectivity of these grizzly bear populations and ensure the grizzlies' recovery across its range. The service published an updated species status assessment in October of last year, rejected petitions to delist the grizzly bear, and proposed an amended 4D rule to better address human grizzly conflicts within the bear's range, which we all support. Here's the kicker. The updated species status assessment clearly shows the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem DPS, which the bill attempts to delist, is no longer considered a distinct population segment of the grizzly bear in the lower 48. Instead, the assessment identifies one DPS encompassing the core grizzly ecosystems throughout Washington, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. So to follow the science, we can't go and arbitrarily delist one small part of the larger grizzly bear population without a thorough review of what that means for the recovery of the grizzly bear throughout its range. And my amendment simply tries to align this bill with the science, make sure that the service continues to follow the science and considers the updated science status assessment in any change to the grizzly bear's status. I urge adoption and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Ms. Hageman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment would make the reissuance of the rule contingent on DOI considering any updates to the species status since July 1, 2017, including the new characterization of a distinct population segment and geographic range, and state-level regulatory mechanisms that will affect the continued recovery of the grizzly bear in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Mr. Chairman, I am opposed to this amendment for many reasons, including the fact that as the science and data have routinely proven, the greater Yellowstone ecosystem grizzly bear population is more than double the recovery goals, which it was, and it should be delisted. Activist judges, however, have blocked our efforts to do so, and as a result, it is time for Congress to act to carry out the intent of the Endangered Species Act. I believe that the ranking member's amendment is making a veiled reference to the proposed rule issued in the final days of the Biden administration. That proposed rule would have merged the greater Yellowstone ecosystem bear into a single DPS with other populations in other states, thereby punishing Wyoming for its recovery successes and tying recovery not to the law or science, but to other species and geographic areas. This rule violates the ESA, the Grizzly Recovery Plan, and the rights of Wyoming citizens. This underhanded attempt to move the goalposts another several hundred yards down the field in relation to the GYE delisting is the exact reason why this legislation is so important and why this amendment is entirely unsuited for the bill. It would exacerbate the 97% failure rate of the ESA and encourage more bad federal policy not rooted in science. I urge all my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back.
Lady yields back. And for clarity, Mr. Huffman, I think you stated this was Hoyle number 2, but it is actually Huffman number 1.
Okay.
All right.
All right. You want me to start over?
No. Just wanted to make sure everybody knew we were on Huffman number 1. Any further discussion on the amendment? So I recognize myself. I oppose this amendment. This is classic moving the goalpost. When the species recovery plan was set up, there were different ecosystems that were established, and now that the grizzly bear has met all the recovery goals in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, we find that people want to blend all the ecosystems together and to make it one large ecosystem. How will we ever accomplish the goals if we move the goalpost in the middle of the game? This amendment is just an attempt to keep this drama playing out in years to come. And I say it's time to end the drama and to delist the grizzly bear. I oppose the amendment and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion on the amendment, the question is on the amendment offered by Ranking Member Huffman, designated Huffman number 1. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson, Chairman Wheeler, Mr. Vanderwall, and Mr. Mather. I want to thank each of you for your testimony, and I will now recognize members for 5 minutes each of questioning. I'm going to begin with me. Mr. Patterson, in Wyoming, we have also dealt with the Fish and Wildlife Service and a wolf introduction program that started in the mid-1990s. I feel your pain when you talk about the loss to livestock and other wildlife. On average, every adult wolf kills and consumes 2 adult animals every single month. We found in Wyoming, after having had years of experience with the Canadian gray wolf, that for every confirmed kill, there are 7 to 8 livestock losses. So when people talk about being willing to compensate ranchers for their losses, oftentimes they will only talk in terms of confirmed kills, and they're the ones that do the confirmation. So this does not take into consideration the disruption to your breeding program. It doesn't take into consideration the disruption and the impact associated with what it does to keeping your cows stirred up. It doesn't take into consideration the loss in weight with your cattle and when you're attempting to sell your livestock. So I definitely understand the challenges that you have had in trying to run your operations when dealing with this apex predator. But it is also clear that the Trump administration is using tools at its disposal that the Biden administration simply didn't want to use to help you manage your conflicts with the Mexican wolves. How have things changed since January, and what barriers still remain since the ESA continues to prevent more robust management? They're listening.
The Trump administration is listening. Excuse me. The Trump administration is listening. They're listening to rural Arizona and rural New Mexico describe the issues. Yes, there are huge issues with our livestock, but we've had a livestock crisis with Mexican wolves for a long time. What's different today, and what folks don't seem to realize, is we now have a public safety disaster as well. These wolves are stalking our kids. They're showing up 10 feet from the front door of our elderly people. They're snatching our dogs off our front porches. They're killing barrel horses. We have a public safety disaster that needs to be addressed.
I also want to confirm, if I heard your testimony correctly, the number of of the Mexican wolves exceed recovery goals as set by the Fish and Wildlife Service. Is that correct?
The service estimates that the minimum number of wolves on the landscape is 286. Privately, they will also tell us that they assume that that number is underestimated by at least 10%. If you do the math, right now or as of December 31 this past year, we were at 318 wolves. The threshold is 320 wolves. We're there.
Okay, all right. Mr. Vanderwall, in your testimony, you note that agriculture in the Tehama-Colusa Canal Authority service area generates over $1 billion annually. How would access to Orland Unit surplus water help safeguard the economic engine during droughts?
Thank you for the question, Chair. This water that we would be able to access, in many years we have droughts and would have to fallow fields, so crops are not being planted, crops are not being grown. So this amount of water that the Orland unit could potentially transfer would be able to help the local economy by growing crops in those fields that otherwise are fallowed.
Okay.
It also, more importantly, I think, is focusing on the opportunity to use that water in crops instead of pumping groundwater or doing recharge projects in wetter or normal type years to help, keep our aquifer healthy. Excuse me.
And Mr. Mather, turning to you. In your testimony, you cover the important role that the lower Snake River dams play in the Pacific Northwest, not only for enhancing grid reliability and energy security, but also supporting critical industries like shipping, tourism, and agriculture. Can you share how important this infrastructure is to the Pacific Northwest?
Chair Hageman, we believe they're not only essential to the Pacific Northwest, we believe they're essential to the country as a whole. As I mentioned in my testimony, the Columbia Snake River Navigation System covers 465 river miles. We're the #1 wheat export gateway in the United States. This system supports billions of dollars of economic activity, American food security, and all sorts of essential jobs on the Columbia River. It also provides some of the most affordable electricity in America that provides reliable service to millions of people in the Northwest. And on the times that we have extra energy, we're able to sell that into the market for other parts of the United States to benefit from. There's tens of thousands of acres of irrigated agriculture. There's a growing cruise boat business and recreation in the region. We think these are really essential services, not just to the Northwest, but to the U.S. as a whole.
Well, thank you, and I agree with you.
The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming.
Benjamin Franklin said over 270 years ago, freedom of speech is a principal pillar of a free government. When this support is taken away, the constitution of a free society is dissolved and tyranny is erected on its ruins. An evil magistrate entrusted with power to punish for words would be armed with a weapon the most destructive and terrible. Under pretense of pruning off the exuberant branches, he would be apt to destroy the tree. Mr. Farage talked in his opening statement that noted that Europe's regulatory regime risks exporting restrictive standards that could violate Americans' constitutional rights. So I'd like to expose that and discuss that a little bit further. He noted that the oh-so-benignly titled Online Safety Act exemplified this regulatory model. The OSA is marketed as a measure to protect children online, but it is clearly being used as a means to actually impose government-backed censorship, especially speech which is critical of government policy. As an egregious example, we have learned that the OSA has been used against Katie Lamb, MP for Weald of Kent, to block videos of her speeches made in Parliament critical of the fallout from the country's immigration policies. Mr. Price, are you familiar with the circumstance where actual speeches in Parliament or other public figures, their speeches are being censored by the government under this claim of protecting minors or protecting people from hearing this speech?
I'm familiar with censorship of public protests. That's already happened in the United Kingdom. The Online Safety Act has placed blocks on those to protect children. That's the claim, but it has prevented adults from accessing it as well.
So the Times has also reported that using the Communications Act of 2003 and the Malicious Communications Act of 1988, there have been 37 police forces have made over 12,000 arrests in 2023 alone, which is the equivalent of 33 a day, all in relation to social media posts. Are you familiar with that information, Mr. Price?
I am, yes.
Okay. In July, the House of Commons Science, Innovation, and Technology Committee released a report indicating that the OSA was merely a first step, is the way that they have described this. In other words, they are planning to do even more to address what they describe as online harm. Have you heard that as well?
I have, yes.
Well, and I think that there's something that just happened this week, and a few of the members have referenced it, but it involved the Irish comedian and writer Graham Linehan, who was arrested in Britain, apparently for social media posts about transgender issues. Did you hear of this circumstance?
Yes, I did. I know Graham personally.
Okay, and according to his Substack article, the trouble actually began when he was in America. He was at the airport in Arizona seeking to fly back to Europe. Was told that he did not have a seat, was put on a later flight, and when he arrived at Heathrow, he was met by 5 armed police officers. Are police officers in England typically armed?
They're not, no.
So did you find it strange that he would be met by 5 armed police officers?
At airports, counterterrorism police are usually armed, and or there's a special wing of the Metropolitan Police that has armed support unit.
So is he considered a terrorist?
I'm not clear what provision he was arrested under of legislation, but there is a power in the Terrorism Act to arrest people at airports and seize their devices.
Sure. Was he identified as a terrorist because of his online posts?
It's not clear yet if he was arrested under that provision, but it has very wide-ranging powers, and it is used on occasion to detain people at ports.
Okay, I understand that, and that probably is more of a frightening answer than I expected, which is that they've used the power that is typically reserved for terrorists or people who are of grave risk to the country to arrest Mr. Linehan at the airport because of his Twitter posts. Is that right?
It's not clear if they use it yet, but that is a power that they frequently, that is used to seize people's devices at airports.
Can you describe more of what happened with this incident involving Mr. Linehan? Do you have the familiarity with the facts?
I've read his statement, yes.
Okay, and could you please explain what happened?
It appears that he was detained on arrival in Heathrow and then arrested, searched, subjected to a long series of questions, most of which revolved around his beliefs on gender ideology and transgender issues. Some of the questions from the police, according to Mr. Linehan, were extremely ideological in nature, and they talked about people who are assigned a gender at birth, which, as he pointed out himself, is activist language that the police should not be using.
So he also claims that his bail conditions one of the conditions was that he could no longer use X. Is this a tactic you have seen or heard of being used before?
Yes, we've seen extraordinary bail conditions, even placed on clients of our own, We had a client, Pastor Dia Moodley, who was given a bail condition that he was not allowed to preach about the differences between Christianity and Islam on the basis of that he would be bailed. So we have seen bizarre and wide-ranging bail conditions set on people before under speech offences.
Time's expired.
Okay, thank you.